middle of a sea of burning sand, a massive wooden wheel stood upright. A tall Apache woman had both arms stretched wide and tied to the spokes. Her body was locked in a rigid position, forced open to its absolute limit, as if she were being pulled between the sky and the earth itself. The ropes cut deep into her wrists, tearing the skin and leaving dark bruises. Her back was crisscrossed with whip marks. Sweat and blood had dried across her dark bronze skin. She was not silent. When his shadow fell over her face, she lifted her head. Her eyes burned with desperation. "Do it!" she screamed, her voice raw and hoarse. "Finish it!" She thought he had come to carry out the final sentence. Caleb stood still for a long moment. He had witnessed cruelty all across this land, but he had never seen anyone bound as if they were being put on display for death itself. He drew the knife from his belt. The steel blade sliced through the first rope. As her body collapsed forward, he caught her before she hit the ground. "You are safe now," Caleb said, his voice low and steady, and for the first time in that long, scorching day, the wheel held no one at all. Nayeli's body was barely holding on when Caleb lifted her onto the horse. The muscles that had been stretched to their breaking point now spasmed in pain with every step the animal took, but she did not make another sound. She had already screamed them all out. Caleb's ranch stood alone in the middle of the dry prairie, an old wooden cabin with a slanted roof and a stone well behind it. He carried her inside and laid her down on the only bed in the house. He lit an oil lamp, and in its glow the deep rope marks around her wrists became painfully clear. When Caleb returned with a bowl of water, Nayeli was more alert. The panic in her eyes was gone, replaced by a sharpness as cold as a blade. "What will you trade me for?" she asked, her voice dry and brittle. Caleb stopped in the middle of the room. "Trade?" he repeated. "White men do nothing without asking something in return," she said. "You saved me. What do you want?" Caleb walked to the table and set the bowl down. Then he removed the revolver from his belt and placed it on the table, far from his own hand. "No one is trading you," he replied slowly. She looked at the gun, then at the cabin door left slightly open, where the night wind drifted in. He had not locked it. "You can leave when you are strong enough," Caleb added. "I keep no one here." Silence stretched between them. Nayeli tried to sit up. Pain shot violently through her shoulder. She clenched her teeth but did not let a single sound escape. Caleb stepped forward, then stopped when he saw the caution in her eyes. "I will not touch you unless you allow it," he said. A breath passed. Then she gave a small nod. He gently washed her wrists, wiping away the dried blood. "No hurry, no pity, just doing what needed to be done." "Why are you not afraid?" she asked suddenly. "Afraid of what?" "My tribe, Caleb Metargaz. I have lived long enough to know there are things more frightening than other people." "Like what?" "Like watching someone die slowly and doing nothing." That answer silenced her. Outside, the night wind rose, striking the wooden walls. Nayeli looked around the simple cabin. There were no decorations, no sign of family, only the quiet weight of many solitary years. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yes, because no one chose to stay." Caleb let out a faint laugh, without humor. "Maybe." Nayeli studied him a moment longer. For the first time since she had been tied to that wheel in the desert, she did not think immediately of death. She thought about waiting, to see what would happen next. And if this story stirs even a hint of nostalgia for the old days in you, you can subscribe to the channel so we can sit down together like this many more times. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls and fell straight across Nayeli's bandaged wrists. She had been awake for a long time, not because of the pain, but because she was used to staying alert. Caleb sat out on the porch, sharpening the edge of an axe. The sound of metal against stone rang out in steady rhythm, the unhurried cadence of a man who was in no rush. Nayeli stepped outside, slow but steady. "You did not ask my name," she said. Caleb looked up. "If you wish to tell it, I will listen." "Nayeli Stormhawk." He nodded. "Caleb Mercer." A light wind moved across the open patch of ground where the wooden wheel had stood before he smashed it apart the night before. Now only broken pieces of wood lay scattered in the sand. "It was not the tribal chief who tied me there," Nayeli said suddenly. Caleb did not interrupt. "It was my stepmother," she continued. "She said I was a disgrace, that I could not bear children, that a woman who cannot carry on the bloodline is not worth keeping." She spoke the words without trembling, but her hands tightened into fists. "My father stood there," she added. He said nothing. It was not the whip that hurt her most. It was the silence of the man who had brought her into this world. They wanted me to marry the chief's eldest son, Nayeli said. I refused. I am not property to be traded. And they tied you to the wheel, Caleb concluded, to let me die slowly in the sun, to make an example of me. Caleb set the axe down. His eyes did not blaze with anger, but they hardened. I have seen men hanged for stealing, he said slowly, but I have never seen anyone hanged for refusing a marriage. In my tribe, Nayeli replied, a woman's value lies in her womb. Caleb looked directly at her. A woman is not a vessel whose worth is measured by children, he said. The words were not loud, not dramatic, but they echoed louder than the crack of any whip in her memory. Nayeli studied him for a long moment. Do you say that, she asked, because you believe it, or because you pity me? Caleb shook his head. I do not pity you. I saw you standing after being bound like that. That is enough for me to believe you have worth. For the first time, Nayeli's gaze softened, not because she had been saved, but because she had been seen. And in that stretch of dry land, between the small cabin and the wide-open sky, something began to change. Not in the desert, but in the way she saw herself. In the days that followed, Nayeli no longer stayed in bed for long. Early one morning, when Caleb opened the cabin door, he found her already standing on the porch, one hand gripping a wooden post to steady herself. Her wrists were still wrapped in bandages, but her eyes no longer carried the dazed look of someone who had narrowly escaped death. You should rest more, Caleb said. My body is not meant to wait for someone else to decide its limits, she replied. He did not argue. They began with small tasks. Caleb dragged a pile of lumber from behind the house, planning to repair the horse pen that had leaned badly after the long season of sand. Laden winds. Nayeli stepped forward without asking and placed her hands on the end of a crossbeam. She lifted it. Caleb paused for a moment. Her strength had not vanished just because ropes had once held her down. Drive the nails, she said. He did. By midday, sweat ran down her spine, but she made no complaint. When pain flared in her wrists, she simply clenched her teeth and kept going, not to prove anything to Caleb, but to prove to herself that this body was no longer something forced open beneath the gaze of others. Toward evening, they walked to inspect the western fence. A section had rotted through. Caleb was about to handle it himself, but Nayeli had already knelt down, pulling the wire tight with the same hands that had once been bound to that wheel. Do not push yourself, Caleb said. I am not being pushed, she replied. I am choosing. The word choosing left him silent. That night, as the fire burned low in the hearth, Nayeli sat across from Caleb. The flames reflected off the scars around her wrists. In my tribe, she said, I had only two roles, bear children or remain silent. And here? Caleb asked. She looked around the cabin. The small house with no mounted trophies, no war prizes on display, no sign of power carved into its walls. Here, she said slowly. I do not know what I am. Caleb nodded. Then we build it from the ground up. Outside, the wind moved across the patch of land where the wheel had once stood. Only scattered splinters remained, gradually disappearing beneath the drifting sand. And for the first time, Nayeli did not think about the day she had been tied there. She thought about tomorrow, and what she would choose to do with it. That night was so quiet they could hear the firewood crackle in the hearth. Caleb was sitting at the table, repairing the handle of a hammer, when he heard the soft scrape of small wooden wheels against the floor. Nayeli had found a low rolling stool, the kind he used to move sacks of grain in the storage shed, and adjusted it for herself, not because she was weak, but because her wrists had not fully healed. She stopped near the fire. You never married again? She asked. Caleb did not look up right away. No, because you did not want to. Or because no one chose you? He let out a quiet breath. Maybe both. Nayeli watched the flames, the light reflecting across her strong features, the face of a woman who had once been bound like an offering in the desert. I was never asked, she said slowly. What I wanted. Caleb looked up at that. They asked how many children I could bear. They asked how well I could serve a husband, but no one asked whether I wanted that man. The wind struck the cabin walls. Her voice did not tremble, but something fragile lay beneath it. I fought, she continued. I hunted. I led war parties, but in the end, my worth was still measured by childbirth. Caleb set the hammer down. Here, he said. No one measures you by that. Nayeli held his gaze a moment longer. Then if I say, she continued, that I want to touch a man because I choose to, not because I am forced, the air between them grew still. Caleb did not step forward. He did not rush. I do not want you because I saved you, he said slowly. I would want you if you choose to stay. If you want me, not out of debt. That answer softened her eyes. She rolled the stool a little closer, not too close, just enough to feel the warmth. I do not want to die without ever being loved, she said. Caleb looked down at his hands, fingers rough from years of labor. He understood that what she meant was not desire alone. It was the right to live fully. He reached out his hand and paused midway, waiting. Nayeli placed her hand in his. Not bound, not forced, not measured. Just two people choosing each other inside a small cabin in the vast desert. Outside, the wind still blew. But inside that house, no one was ever again made to open themselves to someone else's will. That afternoon, the sky fell suddenly still. Caleb was drawing water from the well when he heard the pounding of hooves coming fast from the south. Not one horse. Several. Nayeli heard it too. She did not ask who had come. She knew. 3 riders stopped at the fence. Her father, behind him, her stepmother, and her older brother. There was no longing in their eyes, only judgment. Her father dismounted first. He looked Nayeli up and down, not the way a man looks at his daughter, but the way he looks at something already sentenced. You have shamed the family, he said in their tribal tongue. Nayeli did not step back. I chose to live, she answered. Her stepmother stepped forward, her voice sharp as a cracking whip. A woman who stays with a white man is a stain. You can still return. Marry. Restore your honor. Honor? Nayeli repeated. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the handle of the axe propped against the cabin wall, not to attack, just to stand firm. What honor was there when you tied me to that wheel? She asked. What honor was there when my father stood by and said nothing? The old man's silence weighed heavier than any insult. Caleb stood beside her, not shielding her, not pushing her behind him. Her brother looked at Caleb with open contempt. You think she belongs to you? Caleb replied evenly. She does not belong to anyone. The words tightened the air like a drawn bowstring. Her father looked at Nayeli one last time. You will no longer be one of us. Nayeli tightened her grip on the axe handle, but her voice did not shake. I was never my own when I was there, she said. Now I am. Her stepmother gave a cold laugh. You cannot bear children. No one will ever need you. Nayeli turned to Caleb, not seeking rescue, but confirmation. Caleb met her gaze. I need you. Just 3 words, not loud, but clear. Nayeli faced her family again. I am not a vessel for anyone's bloodline, she said. I choose to stay here. I choose this man, not because he saved me, but because I want to. The wind began to rise again. Her father mounted his horse without another word. Her stepmother turned away first. Her brother looked at her for one long second, then followed. The dust slowly settled. Nayeli stood in the middle of the ranch yard, her hand still resting on the axe handle. No more ropes, no more wheel, no more sentence. Only a woman who had spoken her choice aloud, before those who once believed they could decide her fate. After the day her family rode away, the air around the ranch felt different. There was no longer the sense of waiting for someone to return and drag Nayeli back. No more shadow of a sentence hanging on the horizon. Only open land, newly raised fencing, and the sound of wind moving through the dry grass. But inside Nayeli, something had grown quiet. That evening, she sat on the porch, looking toward the place where the wheel had once stood. The sand had nearly swallowed the last of the broken wood. Caleb stepped outside and set 2 cups of coffee down on the porch step. Do you regret it? He asked. Nayeli did not turn right away. Regret losing them? Or regret finally saying what I believed? Both, she thought for a long moment. I am sad, she said plainly. But I do not regret it. The wind moved through her hair. No ropes, no judging eyes. I used to think if I were stronger, they would not have cast me aside, she continued. If I fought better, if I agreed to marry the man they chose. Caleb watched her profile in the moonlight. Now I understand, she said. Strength is not fighting. Strength is walking away when people do not respect you. Silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. Caleb stood and went back inside the cabin. When he returned, he carried a small piece of metal, polished, smooth. "I am not a man of many words," he said, standing in front of her. "But I know this." He opened his hand. A simple silver ring lay in his palm. No gemstone, no elaborate carving, just raw silver, shaped and smoothed by hand. "I am not asking because I saved you," Caleb said slowly. "I am asking because I want you here. As my equal. Not bound. Not measured." Nayeli looked at the ring, then at him. "You know I cannot give you what they once demanded of me," she said. Caleb nodded. "I do not need that." A quiet second passed. Then Nayeli held out her hand. No trembling, no hesitation. "This time," she said, "I get to choose." Caleb slid the ring onto her finger. Far off, the desert remained as vast as ever. But on that small piece of land, something had changed. Nayeli was no longer the warrior cast aside. She was a woman loved, not for her ability to bear anyone's name or bloodline, but for who she was. Summer arrived with rare stretches of rain. The land around Caleb Mercer's ranch began to soften. The fences stood straight. The horse pen no longer leaned. The well water ran clearer and seemed deeper, as if the earth itself were learning how to live again. Nayeli no longer looked toward the horizon, waiting for someone to come. She walked across the yard in front of the cabin with her back straight, her dark hand wrapped firmly around the handle of a shovel. Her hair tied high at the nape of her neck. There was no trace left of the woman who had once been bound to a wheel in the desert. Only a woman in command of her body and her choices. Their wedding took place on a pale golden afternoon. No church, no long ceremony. Just a few neighbors, a firm handshake, and two people standing as equals beneath the wide-open sky. Caleb did not make promises he was not certain he could keep. He simply said, "I will never force you to become something you do not want to be." Nayeli answered, "I am staying because I choose to." After that, they began building a small house to the east of the ranch. At first, it was Nayeli's idea. "There are women out there," she said, "who are never asked what they want." Caleb did not object. The new house was not large, but its door was always open. A young woman cast out by her family for refusing marriage. A widow who could not bear children and was called useless. They came carrying cautious eyes and quiet fear. Nayeli looked at them and said the words she herself had never been given. "Here, you do not have to prove your worth." The ranch no longer grew only crops and raised horses. It nurtured choice. One afternoon, Nayeli stood where the wheel had once been raised. Fresh grass now covered the ground. There was no sign left of rope or restraint. Caleb stepped up beside her. Neither of them spoke. But in the desert that had once been a place of punishment, there now stood a home. A place where no one was measured by the ability to bear children. Where no one was bound to another person's will. And for the first time in her life, Nayeli did not have to fight to survive. She only had to live. Many years later, when more than half of Caleb's hair had turned silver and the scars on Nayeli's wrists had faded into faint lines against her skin, people still spoke of that small ranch as a strange place in a harsh land. Not because it was wealthy, not because it was crowded, but because it was where two people who had once been measured the wrong way learned how to see each other the right way. Their love did not begin with blazing passion. It began with a simple sentence: "You are safe now." And after that, it was built on hundreds of days of not walking away. No force, no control, just staying. Caleb did not love Nayeli because she was strong. He loved her because she dared to choose. Nayeli did not love Caleb because he saved her. She loved him because he never tried to own her. When we are young, we often believe love is intensity. But after more than half a lifetime has passed, we begin to understand that real love is respect repeated every single day. It is not turning your back when the other person is vulnerable. It is a promise not spoken loudly, but kept through action. Nayeli had once been tied to a wheel because she was declared worthless. Caleb had spent years believing he had nothing left to hold on to. But when they chose each other, they proved something simple and enduring. A person's value does not lie in what they can produce or what they can fight for, but in how they love and how they are loved. And in that unforgiving West, that was the greatest strength of all. The story you have been listening to contains fictional elements, recreated with the support of artificial intelligence. I invite you to listen with your own reflection and discernment. These imagined details are not meant to rewrite history, but to evoke the spirit of the old frontier, where people lived in harsh conditions, made difficult choices, and accepted the cost of those choices. Through this story, I simply hope to share a few enduring lessons about compassion, love, and courage. Lessons that still matter no matter how much time has passed. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I wish you peace, no matter what tomorrow brings. If you enjoyed the story, leave a comment with the number 2, and subscribe to the channel if you would like to hear more stories from the frontier.